Far to the north lives a beast of rage and fury, a fell monster of pure Germanic blood, a demon bred but for a single purpose, to hunt and kill his enemies. All children of Ash and Elm tremble when they hear the name. Dashun, the Badger Hound. Odin, deliver us from the Dashun's wrath, and blessings be upon us this Leif Erikson day, the holiest of all the days.
Hey Rob, happy Leif Erikson Day. Like the rest of the world, I'm sure you probably celebrate. Listen man, I think you're a massive talent, but your Viking movie was not for me. And I just wanted to share some thoughts about why that is. The reason I'm addressing you directly is because, just based on what I've heard from other famous people about their YouTube review viewing habits, there's like a 35% chance that you're watching this right now, and I don't want to say anything about your movie that I wouldn't say directly to your face. I'm relatively certain that you know who I am because I'm 1000% sure that you tune into Esoterica every Friday morning to explore the arcane in history, philosophy, and religion. And I appear on that channel a lot. But just in case you don't, hi, my name's Andy, and I have a bit of a reputation of being the dollar store version of you. We're both survivors of a small-town New England upbringing. We're both dorks about some pretty similar stuff. I directed a film called The Sudbury Devil, which was about 17th century witchcraft that Wikipedia seems to think is notable for its detailed authenticity to the era. And a lot of people accused me of ripping you off, to which I have to patiently explain, no, I ripped off Antonia Bird, thank you very much. I used to do a lot of movie reviews here on this channel and was sort of a very typical angry movie review YouTube guy, but I really lost my taste for it after I made a film of my own. I don't know if you're one of those I don't read reviews type of people. I'm guessing not. In my experience, even as an only very, very slightly famous person, is that actors and directors will say, oh, I don't read reviews, but really, almost all of them do. Me, I'll admit it. I read the reviews, I watch the YouTube video essays, and you know, my film was kind of well regarded, but also a lot of people really hated it. And when some vicious, untalented little brat on the internet is shitting all over your baby, it really fucking sucks. And when I was a barely employed French Quarter drunk making YouTube videos as a hobby to an audience of 5 people, I made some pretty brutal film reviews. Later, those videos got pretty popular, and I have it on very good authority that one of the directors I was shit-talking saw my review and was really upset by it. And you know what? That makes me feel pretty terrible. So this is going to be critical, and I'm not going to censor myself or shy away from anything, but I want you to know that it isn't personal. I'm not trying to destroy you with facts and logic here. I'm just having fun expressing myself. And listen, man, if you're ever in New Orleans, I'd love to buy you an absinthe, even if you're just using me to become friends with Justin. Dudes are weird. So Rob, one of the things that I really liked about your movie The Witch was how you gave your characters an unapologetically historical worldview without sacrificing their sense of humanity, especially the dad. He's a dedicated Puritan, but he also loves his wife and children in a way that's incredibly relatable. The whole family dynamic in that movie is super strong. The mom is kind of a hard ass, the dad is softer and more gentle with the kids. Like, despite the fact that they believe all this weird, creepy Puritan stuff, the domestic interpersonal relationships are all very grounded. They're relatable, and they give us, as audience members, something to grab onto. Your characters in the Northman are not like that. Alexander Skarsgård is literally just angry revenge man. He reminds me of Owen Thunderguns from the Jurassic World movies. At least, I think that's what that character was called. I'm sorry, man, but I find angry revenge man to be actively uninteresting as a protagonist. It's not that he's unlikable and like a total fucking psycho. I actually like that. I'm really glad that in the big village raid scene, Amleth didn't have a moment where he like burst into a room and there was a woman and her baby going, ah, and then he, you know, goes, ah, and then lowers his blade and puts a finger to his lips and says, hide here, or never wait for miracles, da-na-na, or something else fucking stupid. Like, Vampire Eric is a horrible murderer, and that's great. But at the same time, there is absolutely nothing human and relatable about this guy. Did you ever see the HBO show Rome? Titus Pullo was a horrible murderer too. He was unapologetically a man of his time, but he felt like a person that you could actually meet out in the world. How about fucking Deadwood? Al Swearingen is the biggest asshole the world has ever seen, but by the end of the show you love the guy. I'm sorry, Rob, but Angry Revenge Man is not a product of an accurately depicted hyper-masculine martial culture. He's just a poorly realized character. You hint really early on that Vampire Eric's gonna have a redemption arc, right? Like the Tim the Enchanter lady said really early on, you'll need to choose between revenge and love. So here I am thinking, oh cool, so he's consumed with revenge now, but he's gonna fall in love with Anya Taylor-Joy and have a reason to live. And then we're gonna subvert the Viking revenge movie and have a more thoughtful ending about breaking the cycle of violence. But then at the moment when Amleth is forced to choose, he's like,
I choose both.
Isn't that a little bit of a cop-out, man? I mean, I know you really wanted to have that Revenge of the Sith sword fight in the volcano, and I get it. The Revenge of the Sith sword fight in the volcano is very cool. But should it really come at the expense of the main character's arc? And you know, that arc didn't necessarily have to be a faux Christian morality tale about forgiveness or a postmodern meditation on toxic masculinity. I have faith in you, man. I think you could have given Amleth a redemption arc that felt authentically Norse. I mean, you probably know better than I do, man. The Norse had social mores and values that were a lot more complex than shouting and murdering people. Like, yes, they had that cultural prescription for revenge, but in the sagas there's a lot of pathos and tragedy in those sorts of stories. They aren't just angry revenge man growls and screams about how angrily he plans to take revenge.
I will become a hailstorm of iron and steel. I will have my vengeance.
And look, the other characters aren't much better, in my very personal subjective opinion. Uncle Claudius oscillates between stoicism and yelling. Queen Gertrude probably has the most going on out of anybody, and Nicole Kidman chewing the scenery is simply delightful. But I still don't find anything viscerally, emotionally compelling about that character. Ethan Hawke is literally going around telling people, I must die in battle, and like, dude, real people don't talk like that. Characters in the sagas don't talk like that. This kind of stuff just reeks of the Victorian and German romantic Viking revival. Rob, I've heard you call this film the most accurate Viking movie ever made. And in some ways, you're absolutely right. I mean, it's pretty much uncontested. I don't need to tell you that the material culture is impeccable. Details like the Russian funeral Ibn Fodlan wrote about, the mythologically accurate depiction of Odin, good old Ingvar Sigurdsson, the Icelandic Tom Hanks in a dress, practicing satyr magic. This stuff is all great to see on screen. But on the other hand, the way people behave seems wildly out of step with what we know of Norse culture. Admittedly, and as you're probably well aware, we actually know very little definitively about Norse culture, but let's just narrow the comparisons down to just the sagas. I remember when this came out, everybody was saying, the Northman is like an Icelandic saga right up there on the screen. And Rob, with the greatest respect, no it fucking isn't. The sagas, at least in the English translations that I've read, have a very distinct style. And I know you know this, Rob. This is just for the edification of the people listening in. The prose in the sagas is not super bombastic and shouty and, I'm gonna fucking kill you! It's very restrained and straightforward and sparing, and the diction is very basic. It reads like Hemingway, and it's funny. The humor is bone dry, but there's joy in it. There's a sense of adventure and fun. These were the action movies of their day. And that's just not the tone of your movie. Like, at all. All of your movies are extremely miserable and disgusting, which I like a lot. I think it worked good in The Witch and even better in The Lighthouse, but here it strikes me as just straight up historically inaccurate. It's a lot less like the sagas and a lot more like romantic Victorian ideas about the sagas. Do you remember how like 10, 20 years ago, a common thing you heard from Norse experts was, you know, the Vikings weren't all rape, pillage, and plunder. They were craftsmen and poets and merchants, etc. Basically, they had this big push in public-facing history where they were trying to rehabilitate Norse culture's image into something closer to the cosmopolitan reality. And as you know, they needed to do this because of 19th and 20th century misconceptions started by, who else, The fucking Victorians. All those skull-measuring opera-goers who saw the Old North as the genesis period of their nationalistic myths. The British popularized the idea of the Norse as bloodthirsty raiders due to, of course, their history of invasion and settlement of the Danelaw. The Americans wrote novels calling Leif Erikson's crew the first Yankees and identified Norse religion's struggle against encroaching Christianity with their own anti-immigration and anti-Catholic rhetoric. And the Germans, well, you know what the Germans were doing. And the image they had in their minds of Vikings, a term they popularized, was a big hairy guy going,
I will find them, and I will tear out their eyes, and I will tear out their tongues.
Because they were viewing Norse culture primarily through the lens of their ecclesiastical Christian enemies, who consistently talked about the Norse as though they were carnivorous beasts rather than a complex society. And again, I know you know this, which is why I find it really odd that you leaned into that ahistorical stereotype in your movie. So Rob, I don't have to tell you that this movie looks amazing. You're an incredible fucking painter. I am always visually dazzled by your movies, but to be completely honest, I'm rarely hooked by them emotionally. Except for The Lighthouse. I felt a lot when I first watched The Lighthouse. Namely, laughter, joy, and pride in being a New Englander. I think The Northman in particular has a lopsided ratio of spectacle and affect. You have these amazing images and sequences popping up fairly consistently over the runtime, but cool shit happening is not enough to make a truly compelling cinematic experience. I know there are those out there who will disagree with me. Take the mushroom trip sequence in the temple, for instance. Sort of going back to what I was saying earlier, this Terence McKenna shit is an odd choice in terms of historical authenticity. We don't know how the Norse worshipped their gods, but just going full psychedelic shamanism feels a little bit, I don't know, lazy, like a modern secular failure of imagination, even. And also, I assume your intention for this scene's function was to give baby Amleth a bonding experience with his father, introducing the family tree motif and emphasizing the importance of ancestry and tradition within this culture. And I feel like there could have been a more emotionally resonant way to do that than just, holy fucking shit, I'm tripping balls! Similar thing with the village raid sequence a little later on. It's all one shot. Yes, it's highly impressive. It looks great. I'm sure it was a bitch to shoot and you did a great job, but like, why? What about this sequence screams this needs to be a oneer? I don't think it particularly adds realism. This whole movie is operatic as fuck. It's elevated into the stratosphere. In fact, with all this mud and gloom, I keep half expecting someone to pop up jabbering on about the violence inherent to the system.
Help! Help! I'm being repressed!
And I don't think it's particularly entertaining. I don't know, maybe it's just me. You probably disagree. But I like action with a bunch of dynamic angles and impactful cuts. I like being in the thick of it, being right there with the characters, getting thrown around in the mosh pit of battle, not gracefully tracking along with Amleth like he's Sean going down to the shops. Of course, the obvious answer to that why question, which you're probably muttering under your breath right now, is because it's fucking awesome, that's why. But, I'm sorry, called me old-fashioned, but nothing is more awesome than being emotionally invested in a story. Spectacle without emotion is just showing off. Story should always come first. So Rob, be honest. Did y'all include that little detail about how Fjolnir lost his kingdom and became a sheep farmer just so you could shoot most of this movie in Iceland? Because, like, I understand how overwhelming that temptation must have been. Iceland is completely gorgeous. But you know what's even more beautiful than Iceland? Having a satisfying and coherent story in your film. In Hamlet, Uncle Claudius doesn't move to Minnesota to become a gas station attendant. He's the fucking king of Denmark, and the stakes of Hamlet's revenge are incredibly high. What are the stakes if Amleth kills Fjolnir? I guess it'll have an impact on the sheep. They and the slaves can start an anarcho-syndicalist commune out in the wilds of Iceland, I guess? It's been like 10 minutes since the village raid, and you're doing it again, Rob. You're sacrificing story for spectacle. Okay, now Amleth's having a pointless sword fight with a zombie, and all its awesomeness is immediately undercut by this kind of Bush-era new atheist reveal that all the supernatural aspects were just his imagination? Give me a fucking break. Rob, who kidnapped you and directed this movie? Blink twice if your captor is also shooting Nosferatu. And eventually, all this style over substance takes a toll. By the time we're deep into the second act, because I'm not emotionally invested, it's boring, it drags, it's not fun to watch. This is the most thrilling part of the original story of Hamlet, because Hamlet's pretending to be mad and wrestling with existentialism, and it's full of skullduggery and pathos, but here it's just angry revenge man angrily taking revenge. When I first saw this movie, this was when I yawned so loud it woke up everyone else in the theater. I'm just kidding, Rob. That's just my inner angry YouTube movie review man coming out. Old habits die hard, I guess. Somebody smoking weed. Okay, Rob, so it's safe to say I dislike the way you portrayed Norse culture in your movie. I think it's highly mythologized and stereotypical. But I don't think that it's a secret piece of Nazi propaganda, which is unfortunately what a bunch of people out there in the big bad world seem to think. I'd imagine this must be especially frustrating for you, because when you were promoting this film, you were shouting from the rooftops about how this wasn't a Nazi thing. It seemed like you told every journalist on planet Earth that you despised the Nazi misappropriation of Norse culture and that all the Viking machismo culture war shit was not your bag. And yet, people on the left, including some very dear friends of mine, came out of the theater saying that the Northman was, quote, chud shit. And the Stormfront crowd was going crazy about how you'd managed to slip this script past the Jews of Hollywood and told a proudly pro-white big screen story. Now, just speaking for myself, if I had directed this film, I would have solved this problem preemptively by having a scene where Amleth looks right into the camera and says, "Trans women are women. Gentrification is neocolonialism. The history of all hitherto existing society is the history of class struggles." Ah! No, but seriously, if I were you, I probably would have gone into the script writing process being a little bit more sensitive to the possibility that Nazis were going to absolutely love this shit. I've got these skits that I do. I know, where I dress up as all sorts of abhorrent people throughout history and parrot their absolutely vile beliefs, but I'm always very careful to portray them as pathetically as possible so no reasonable person could think that they're cool. What I'm doing is comedy, so it's very much apples and oranges compared to what you're doing, but I still think that the one-dimensional characters and style over substance execution don't really do your film any favors in this regard. Amleth doesn't feel human, but if he did, then that vulnerability alone might have been enough to turn off the Nazis, who, as I see it, just fundamentally hate humanity and want to dominate it and transcend it. That said, I think the main thing that rang ideological alarm bells for most people was the film's emphasis on family and generational legacy. The Nazis were all very 14 words when they saw that, and I think that just made everybody else pretty uncomfortable as a result. But I would argue that a Viking movie is incomplete without a focus on family legacy. I mean, all the best sagas take place over generations, right? The main character isn't one person, it's an entire family, and the story consists of their adventures over the course of many years and multiple generations. This is a common thing you hear from a lot of indigenous cultures around the world. There's less focus on the individual and more on the whole family. One thing I've heard from Native American colleagues is that there's this cultural prescription to learn from wisdom from the 7 generations that preceded you and work to make the world a better place for 7 generations after you. This is pretty similar to medieval Icelandic understandings. And look, no matter how I or anyone else would have approached this, ultimately, the fact that the Nazis misappropriated Norse culture is not your problem as a director making a movie set 700 years before the modern concept of race was even invented. I would have been a little bit more worried about it, but I'm also on the internet a lot more than you are and probably have a skewed perspective on this sort of thing. I do think it would have helped if you had been truer to actual medieval Norse culture and not Victorian and Hollywood mythology, but at the end of the day, you're probably not going to solve racism with a Viking movie. So, whatever. In the words of Hank Schrader, do what you're going to do. Finally, I just want to say, I'm very glad that a movie like this was made in the film industry's current climate, and I'm particularly thrilled that someone who clearly spends a lot of time in oddity shops is getting $90 million budgets from Hollywood. Thanks for watching, man, and again, no hard feelings. Sincerely, Andy.